But isn't it interesting that the only subsidies that they seem to be able to curtail or cut altogether are those going to renewable energy, biofuels, you know, the bioethanol and alcohol fuel, losing all the federal subsidies and incentives this year. How can that be? You know, and those are fractional on a dollar sort of subsidies when you compare them to what petroleum industry or what nuclear industry. And I guess, do you have figures for what the subsidies are in the nuclear industry? Or we know them from petroleum and stuff, but do you know what they would kind of amount to?
Well, Union of Concerned Scientists has a paper up on their website that details it. But basically, the cost at the bus bars, it leaves the power plant, that we think we're paying is 5 cents, and it really should be 10 cents. So essentially, your electric bill, which is probably 13 or 14 cents, really should be 20 cents if we factored in all of those subsidies. But, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. The nuclear industry has, through the Department of Energy, gets enormous subsidies, and now we're on to thorium reactors and small modular reactors and advanced power reactors. The government funded an organization called New Start, whose purpose was to get the advanced reactors up and running that are going on in Georgia. And we were actually, through our tax dollars, paying New Start and New Start's attorneys to prevent the public from being involved in the process. So public money went to a private corporation to prevent the public from participating in the licensing process.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Well, you know, this whole thing is so unnecessary, too, because basically nuclear power and oil and coal, they're all based on things that eventually run out. You know, and so whoever controls the limited amount of those things makes the money. And so there's a real vested interest in industries to use things that run out because they can make way more money on something where it has an unlimited supply, which is like solar energy. Now, you know, Arnie may agree with me on this, which is we're actually both very much in favor of nuclear power, although it doesn't sound like it. But the thing is, where do you put a nuclear power plant? The answer is there is a right place to put it in relation to people, and that's 92 million miles away. It's called the sun, okay? So when the nuclear power plant is that far away, you don't even need a containment vessel, okay? So the energy coming from the sun is something we're going to have for 4.5 billion years. In fact, well, that's about as long as some nuclear waste lasts. So when the sun burns out, yes, we have other problems, you know. But until then, solar energy is this annoying thing to corporations because no one has to directly pay for it. It falls everywhere. There's no channeling it or collecting it or keeping people away from it. So here we are talking about 20, 40, 50 cent a kilowatt electricity from these you know, advanced nuclear power plants, and yet some people in the world pay that amount for electricity right now from oil. You know, I'm working on a project in Latin America where this major city is running on bunker oil, in other words, the worst diesel oil you can get, and they're paying, you know, 20, 30 cents a kilowatt for the electricity. We're working with them to go ahead and start going to solutions to this problem. So we're going ahead and making alcohol, which we can then use to run a generator, the same generator that's running on diesel fuel right now, for 10 cents a kilowatt. And, you know, I've got a long history with this. Back during the Diablo Canyon protests, I sent down some of my staff from my alcohol fuel company with a big 6-cylinder generator on the back running on alcohol, and we had a big sign that says, Diablo Canyon power, 10 cents a kilowatt, this alcohol power, 3 cents a kilowatt. Even in the little generator that we were doing, they're running the emergency medical, you know, center for all the protesters. So, you know, it's been true for a long time that nuclear power isn't economical, but it is a great giveaway program to major corporations. Now, the subsidies thing just drives me up the wall. You know, our wonderful Senator Dianne Feinstein married Oklahoma oil Senator Tom Coburn and said, oh, we can't afford alcohol fuel subsidies because we have a deficit going on and all that. And they got, for the first time, since Republicans have tried to get rid of this, you know, subsidy, they finally succeeded after, like, since Jimmy Carter, so that's decades. So, but there's a difference between nuclear subsidies and oil subsidies and renewable subsidies. In the case of alcohol fuel, because we make it in this country from our sunlight, right? Carbohydrates come from the sun, and we make those into alcohol. When someone buys $1 of alcohol here in the US, it generates $3 in tax revenues. So for every dollar of subsidy, not dollar of purchase, it creates $3 new of taxable events because all the parts of the plant are made here, all the people who work on the plant are here, and so they spend their money here. All that cycles back into the economy, which creates tax revenue. So in the towns in the Midwest where there are alcohol plants, the pools are open, the libraries are open, all the public services are happening because taxes are being paid. When we pay for oil or nuclear subsidies, that's money flushed down wherever you're flushing it permanently. It just goes away. It's like military spending. So when we do renewables, we are using something that is American, sun falling on our place, and it's made by people doing work that can't be outsourced. The sunlight falls here, and it's not something that we can ignore as an incredibly important part of our economy, much less, ignore it from the environment. I mean, you're talking about stuff in nuclear power plants where a tablespoon of that fuel, if you distributed it equally to all the people in the world, would kill every one of them. You only need a couple of atoms of plutonium in your lungs to guarantee your death. So when we're talking about Fukushima and we're talking about what happens if the fuel from number 4 cooling pond falls on the ground when the building falls over and explodes into fire, we're talking about the winds of the earth carrying death around the northern hemisphere. This is not a small localized event. This is something that everyone in the northern airspace has a say in, or should.
It's phenomenal. Arnie, are you as concerned? Dan Hirsch, when he was on our program back in April last year, was talking about the top 10 list in the U.S. And it's easy to get to think, oh, this is Japan's problem or Chernobyl's Russia's problem. He had India Point and San Onofre right up there at the top of the list. But are those things, are there places beyond L.A. that you're looking with concern right now?
Well, I've said that there's the 23 nukes that are just like Fukushima Daiichi should be shut down. That means there's still 80 running, but those 23 are just too similar and too weak to continue operation.
But even if you shut them down, you can't, it's not like a light switch, right? I mean, you can't just turn that off and everything's great and you can just go, how do you do that? How do you shut them down?
You've got to get the fuel out of the pools and into dry cask storage, which is an air-cooled storage that sits on the ground. Now, Fukushima Daiichi had dry cask storage, and all the dry casks survived the earthquake and the tsunami just fine. So the biggest problem facing the United States right now is to get all of the fuel out of the pools and onto the ground in these dry cask storage. The reason we're not doing it is because the industry doesn't want to spend the money, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is letting them get away with it. But to get back to your question about Dan, there's, in addition to the 23 BWRs that are identical to Fukushima, the two most dangerous plants in the country are San Onofre and Indian Point because of emergency planning and their age. We've learned a lot more about seismic issues at San Onofre and Indian Point. They're both near enormous concentrations of people. So the combination of the probability of an accident being greater than we anticipated, and the population has grown around these nuclear plants for 40 years, that's a double whammy, and I don't think those licenses should be extended. The other one that scares me is down in at the Oconee units in South Carolina. Right upstream from them is a huge hydroelectric dam. Now, hydroelectric dams don't fail very often, but you don't get tsunamis off of Japan very often either. And if that hydroelectric dam were to fail, it would produce about a 50-foot wave that would come right over that nuclear facility. And yet the NRC said, well, the probability of that dam failing is low, so therefore we're not going to worry about it. And Dan said before, to my mind, the key is that engineers design